Okay, so there's standard ambient case lighting, and then there's the LED matrix. I think the Evolv X2 from Phanteks is the right product to receive the matrix treatment just because it doesn't feel like an afterthought. Everything in terms of the integration and design is just so seamless. This is the 900 pixel LED matrix that is fully customizable per pixel. And also the new fabric coating on the interior creates this beautiful color contrast between exterior and interior paneling that was somewhat available before, but it is way more present now. Now, there are a few interesting observations about the fabric. First, you absolutely cannot see through it, so any indication that there's a screen under there is not visible at all. There's also such minimal pixel bleed that happens, so all the pixels kind of stay sharp, and the fabric helps to add texture to anything that you put on the matrix and it shines through. I love it when companies integrate interesting materials in their case design to just liven up the space, and I think Phanteks did a great job here. The entire integration of the fabric around the corners, around how there's absolutely no stretching happening. It is perfectly flush against whatever is underneath there. It feels like a really high quality upgrade. Now, the Evolv X2 is like the prime candidate to showcase the matrix because the case is designed to beautifully showcase your hardware in the first place, and adding a little bit of flair in that power supply chamber at the bottom is not a bad idea. For example, in the X2, I love the see-through nature from left to right, especially when a big graphics card is installed. There's this element of hand-holding when it comes to even choosing your cooling components because the case only supports 120mm fans and they all fit in perfectly in the bottom cavity and the top, especially in how the radiator, it gets kind of hidden, and also the rear fan, how it sits nice and flush against the case frame. It's all very well designed. I wish I had a full-size BTF motherboard because the case doesn't really work that well with cables because everything is on display, but still you can do a good job on the interior to make sure that things are exiting just fine. And it's interesting to notice the differences on how the matrix actually interacts with both the white model and the black one. So on the black one, the material has a little bit of a cool pattern, so it does create way nicer texture difference between the exterior and the interior versus the original brushed aluminum. But there are some differences in the fabric and where they meet, especially between that middle spine column that you remove to access your PCI brackets. They're not perfectly aligned in terms of, the pattern. So that's not necessarily an issue, but it's definitely something that I noticed. While the gray fabric here, because of its pattern, is way more uniform and equal, so any misalignment on the fabric doesn't seem to bother me. But then I had a thought, does the matrix suit a non-RGB system or a full-out RGB build like this one? And the answer might surprise you. Now, for a case whose main highlight is the matrix on the side, I decided to do a full blackout build just to make sure that we don't have any distracting RGB elements on our hardware so that we can really appreciate the matrix. This is actually why I went with an air cooler and non-RGB fans everywhere. All right, let's see what this thing looks like booted up. It starts with nothing, just a pulse waiting to become something more. A sound that bends space, a curve that cuts through silence, a moment that pulls you in. This isn't just what you hear, it's what you feel. The tension before the drop, the calm before the win. Because every feeling, every world, every heartbeat has an origin. The Fractal Scape, check it out below. And turning the system on, the matrix looks so cool, especially when we have other color matched RGB components to red, but the glass is slightly tinted. So when we remove it, you can see the much better color contrast difference between the actual fabric and like the black frame itself. So I was kind of hoping that Phanteks would make the the glass here slightly less dark. The included case lighting also helps with a little bit of that ambient separation between our fabric and the other pieces, with one more strip at the top here that actually spans all the way through the top panel towards the back. And I really appreciate the sharpness of all the pixels, but also the actual vibrancy of the color, because they are coming through a darker fabric. So I was thinking that some of the color might get lost, but it is quite evident. All these pixels are super vibrant and bright. Now I do have a bunch of RGB components, so let's see what the white system would look like when we go full out. Now for the RGB system, things look way different. I think the Matrix actually complements the rest of the RGB components perfectly well. So it's not just an isolated power supply shroud that is illuminated, but we have fans at the bottom, at the top, the pump is illuminated. So the Matrix actually works very well in this setup. But let's see what it looks like with the side panels, huh? Wow, this actually looks so much better than I expected, and the glass does not reflect the lighting back because it's close enough to the Matrix, so it's not an issue in terms of creating that interior glare. This looks way better than I thought. As for the software point of view, I think Phanteks did a good job as a starting point, but they definitely need to do more because I don't think we have as much customization as I would like. Our layout library, for example, is pretty diverse, letting you select up to, from one section all the way up to like 6 smaller sections and distribute what you want to display on each of these things, but you don't have an option to like expand the width. And so here, for example, if I choose something at the front, like the time, and send it to the screen, you can see it's not exactly centered. Like it's kind of curving around this corner, and I would like to be able to reduce the size of the font, for example, or potentially move the clock slightly to the right, for example, to just remove it off that corner. But you do have plenty of things to play around with, both in terms of your color selections, and this actually doesn't take into account your system time settings. You can just select your time zone independently. For smaller widgets, they actually look and feel pretty good. I can read it perfectly fine. It matches perfectly to the rest of the color of the case. So I think Phanteks did a good job in terms of actual color coordination, because this red that I select here in the software looks perfectly like I see it actually in real life. Now, for a lot of people, displaying some form of system information here looks really cool. And here we can see the temperature of your CPU, but this is more of like a bar, right? Like a little gradient that looks cool, but actually doesn't give you any information about like the temperature of those components, which is where you can select a different widget system data. For example, here with CPU, the number can be white and the background can be black. Here, I know that my CPU right now is at 31 degrees, and I can do the same thing for the top. Now we actually have readable information about our GPU temperature and our CPU temperature, but notice we don't have an option to like rename this G to something else. It'd be cool if we could name this like an RTX, whatever cards we have in there. You can select to have an alarm setting if your temperature goes above a certain limit. So for example, I can show you what that looks like. And that's a cool information like element. I do wish that we had more options for our time and date settings. Of course, this would not be a gaming case without some rainbow puke. And I gotta say, the color variations here is so gorgeous. Everything just pops so well. The thing is, here you can only adjust the positioning of the RGB strip, for example, slightly lower or higher. You cannot extend it to be the entire case of the Matrix. And I think that's, again, just highlights the lack of customization options that you might potentially have. Like being able to add more rows here would be great. Like if you want to have slightly higher or lower. Here we have, let's say we have these crabs that are coming out, and you can select the color per crab in terms of like what they look like, and even select the eye color. They are giving us some stuff to play around with, but otherwise, I would say it's kind of limiting. And we only have 3 preloaded animated options. I would say that's kind of limiting. For example, I want more than 3 cats to be displayed and for the cats to be continuous and not to reappear once the last one disappears off to the corner. I like this shooting star animation where certain pixels appear and disappear, and like a random shooting star would appear every whatever frequency you set it at. You can also disable that option if you don't want to. And then there's the Matrix Creator, which allows you to type in certain letters. So hello, good people. Here, it looks awesome. but I don't have the option to adjust the speed of that text. And this is supposed to be a matrix editor. And we have only a few, preloaded icons, which is great. But where's my poop emoji, for example, just for some entertainment purposes. And then we have the editor section, which is the only one that actually allows you to expand this entire section and gives you a little bit more width to play around with. Here you have per pixel customization in terms of color, in terms of where they go, and you can kind of draw your way into something that looks unique and your own. Even adjusting the brightness of those pixels. One annoying aspect about reconfiguring certain elements is that, for example, if I want the middle section to now be split into two, like the rest of them, I can't just right click and select whichever one I want. For example, if I want to change it to here, the whole thing resets. I feel like all this shows is that there's a lot of potential here with the Matrix that is not yet realized, not because of the hardware, because I think the color options are fantastic. The pixel quality is very unique, especially with the texture of the fabric on top. The software is the one thing that holding the Matrix back. So yeah, the software section is definitely not as exciting as I thought it might be, especially to cater to a younger demographic, being able to, let's say, display some YouTube analytics on there, like your subscriber counts, your any live information about weather or any incoming emails or whatever. None of that is available yet, and there is no information on whether Phanteks is even thinking about those things. Now, the LEDs are slightly warm to the touch, but in no way that should be one of your concerns. And when it comes to temperatures, the case is the same as the original Evolv X2. So as long as you populate some good AIO in there, you should be fine. Now, price-wise, this one's kind of a tricky one. You're looking at $129 for the original Evolv X2 and $199 for the Evolv X2 Matrix. So $70 premium for this cool lighting integration that can do some things, but with hopeful potential for expansion into doing more things in the future. And at this point, I think it might be fair to start looking into external display solutions from Corsair, from Lee & that might display some system information that you value. But I will say the Matrix is a really cool product. I hope the maturity of it is linear, as in we get more options, we get more support, we may get more API integrations, but I don't know if you want to trust on buying a product with a future potential for software expansion. So on that note, I'm Dmitry. Thanks so much for watching. I'll talk to you in the next video.